Welcome back to The Perspective. We're with Christopher Briggs in the studio talking about the emergence of Islamic State before it entered the international media spotlight. So we spoke about the move to Iraqi control. Can you explain how that happened?
Yeah, well, initially in the post-Saddam's overthrow in Iraq, you'd had international jihadists, if you like, who may have been Egyptians, Jordanians, Pakistanis, mainly in Iraq, other Middle Eastern countries, because they spoke the language and already had networks within the country. They came in effectively and set up Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia, AQIM, or Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Mesopotamia being an ancient name for Iraq. They set up these groups, organised along their sort of jihadist principles to fight the Americans, to fight the infidel. That was very much their cause. That was the banner that they operated under. And then they would bring in local groupings under this umbrella. These could be the tribal groups of Anbar in West Iraq. It could be the former military elements in Mosul and Tikrit in northern Iraq. It could be religious elements from within Iraqi society, and they try and bring them in under this umbrella of sort of international Al-Qaeda, franchises, if you like. The relationship clearly, and as I say, I'm not a specialist in the internal workings of these groups. I was seeing it from the outside, secondhand. My understanding is that there was a number of frissions, both. One was in terms of the leadership, whether that was going to come from outside international jihadists or be Iraqi-led. Another was regions within Iraq. If firstly I just deal with the Iraqi national versus international jihadist issue, well, there were increasing rumblings within the organisations under the umbrella that effectively the international jihadis were not representing the views of the common Iraqi, were not representing Iraqi interests, were merely using Iraq as a battleground for their own enemy, the Americans. There was also, particularly for example in Anbar presence in the west of Iraq, there was increasing disgruntlement by the tribal sheikhs about business activity by the jihadists. They saw raising of funds and taxes as being their domain in those areas, whereas the international jihadists were effectively cutting themselves into that and taking funds away from, for example, the local groups. So by 2006, it had clearly emerged that there was Iraqi leadership of the groups. So clearly that dispute was won by the Iraqis, and we saw increasingly less involvement from foreign jihadis, increasing the Iraqi leadership of those groups, 06, 07 onwards. In terms of regions, again, the west of Iraq, Anbar province, was the focus of a very specific US campaign called the Sawa, the Uprising, which was effectively the US linking with local tribes to try and remove Al-Qaeda elements. So the dynamic in West Iraq changed completely, and you had the Sawa movement versus the jihadist movement. The Sawa being the local tribal groupings, the jihadists being the sort of extremist outsiders, fringe elements. In the north of Iraq, the Mosul area, which is the area now that's dominated by Islamic State, there was far more of a nationalist, former Saddam era quorum within the group, and they effectively took over the agenda from the international jihadists.
Right, so can they expand from their bases in places like Mosul?
Well, I mean, in 2013, 2014, we've seen them expanding in Syria. There was always links cross-border between insurgent groups in Iraq and Syria. At the time, we thought this was probably down to Ba'athist links between the Syrian regime and the former Ba'ath Saddam regime in Iraq. And effectively that became Syria became a pipeline for jihadists, equipment, etc. into Iraq. and a smuggling route out for the insurgent groups. Once Assad's control was challenged, that left effectively ungoverned areas within Syria, and I was very surprised to see how quickly Islamic State had moved into those areas and effectively established themselves in Syria, taking control of cities like Raqqa and other substantial population centres.
I've got to hold you there, but we'll go straight back to that when we come back. Come back in a second. We're not done yet on The Perspective.